Sir Anton Muscatelli is the vice-chancellor of the University of Glasgow. He's also the chair of the Russell Group and advises Scottish First Minister Nicola Sturgeon. We had the opportunity to sit down with him as the university celebrated 10 years of partnership with Kaplan.
Well, inevitably, given the variety of education systems around the world, you're always going to find barriers that exist to students who want to access a university like Glasgow, a world-leading university like Glasgow, but there may be educational barriers, there may be linguistic barriers, there may be other types of transition issues, and having a partnership such as Glasgow International College has enabled us to access that talent that otherwise might not have been able to come to Glasgow. And then we've collaborated also more widely, of course, with Kaplan beyond GIC on various initiatives to raise the profile of the university more globally. From our point of view, the key element of what we're trying to do at Glasgow is to be a world-changing university and to bring, students to Glasgow who are going to go on from Glasgow to change the world. And when you're searching for those sorts of, that sort of talent, people who become world changers, you find that in various guises. You find perhaps people who are already high achievers, high academic achievers, and they will transition most naturally directly to the university. You may find others that because of linguistic or socio-economic disadvantage or whatever may need a different route in, whether they're local Scottish students or whether they're international students. And these sorts of partnerships, like the one with Kaplan, I think are hugely important.
Interesting. And you mentioned that this talent can be anywhere in the world. Are you doing work to, for example, I'm just intrigued, would you be doing work to tap into potential in Africa, for example? Because I think everyone has acknowledged there's a huge sort of Asia-West transition, and I imagine you might be looking beyond that.
Well, Glasgow University has one of the longest relationships with many sub-Saharan African countries. So we founded, as I said, a number of medical faculties and veterinary medicine faculties around sub-Saharan Africa. We have maintained relationships, we have long-standing, very close relationships in countries like Tanzania around areas like environmental research. In the latest Global Challenge Research Fund initiatives, Glasgow has actually captured the vast majority of the funding that's come to Scotland. We've created some major projects around global cities, around helping the poor in poverty relief in areas like sub-Saharan Africa or part of Asia. And also what we're looking for as well is we're doing much more interdisciplinary research in the whole area of international development. Areas like One Health, for instance, the interface between human and animal health, which of course for countries that are emerging or poorer countries is hugely important, because that's where these are the big problems that need to be addressed in these countries where there's diseases communicated between from animal to human, or you have non-communicable diseases, which are a huge challenge and a huge growth in emerging economies.
Very interesting. So I can see how you're trying to look at world-changing and global opportunities and value for public good.
Absolutely.
And encapsulate that all. Very fascinating. I wanted to ask you briefly about the Russell Group as well. You're chair of the Russell Group. And I was reading the Migration Advisory Committee submission made by the Russell Group, which essentially is that you would like to see more post-study work opportunities, particularly for all master's students.
Yes.
I know you've been piloting that at Glasgow. Why do you think that's so important?
Well, it's so important because we're seeing that other countries that have piloted these type of opportunities, Canada is an obvious example, Australia over periods of time, and indeed what is happening in parts of continental Europe. I mean, they're attracting some fantastic talent. If the slogan of Global Britain is to be really important post-Brexit, and that's about not only us reaching out and whether, exporting and being successful in terms of exporting, but it's also about trying to attract the best talent, which will no doubt return to, perhaps many of them will return to their own country, but some of that talent, seeing how it can really help to leverage our economic assets here. Let me just give you one example. If you look at Silicon Valley, some of the biggest successes of Silicon Valley have come from first-generation Indian immigrants. Many of them came to US universities and then remained on post-study work type schemes, founded companies, created wealth. If we are serious about wanting to make Britain, global Britain, and a successful Britain, then part of that is also saying we want the best talent here, give them an opportunity in the first couple of years after graduation to really make an impact. Many of them will then go back, but it will make a huge difference to the attractiveness of our university and what we can achieve in terms of changing the world, such as the University of Glasgow.
And have you seen a significant uptake of those students on the pilot scheme that have been able to stay a little longer?
This is the first year that we've just literally just joined, so we will see what happens. But we know that we know from the universities that began the pilot scheme that it certainly seems to have had quite an impact. So it's great that the scheme has been rolled out to a number of other universities, including Glasgow.
Great. And you obviously are aware of the Kaplan study with HEPI of the value of international education.
Yes.
Do you think we need more evidence, or do you think the Migration and Advisory Committee will now be enough for the government to really consider and possibly change its policy settings?
I think one of the most important things, bits of evidence, was the evidence around returning students. I think that was important because it helped to correct the impression that there was any issues around higher education. I think that myth has largely been diffused and debunked, and I think that's really important. But I think the Migration Advisory Committee can look exactly into that sort of contribution in terms of post-study work, which at the moment possibly has less evidence because we of course had a very short period in the UK when we had that opportunity. So it'll be really interesting whether it compares what we're offering now compared to other countries, how other countries have benefited. So I think those comparative studies to see how other countries which are adopting perhaps different types of schemes have benefited and how we can become more competitive. That fits very well within the rhetoric of how can we in a post-Brexit Britain make the most of our human capital.
Are you hopeful that there could be a change in policy which will enhance universities' offer?
I think so, because I mean the process that's being undertaken with the Migration Advisory Committee is an evidence-based process, and the MAC I think is looking genuinely at evidence. So I'm very optimistic because I think the evidence that we have anecdotally, not only anecdotally but also in terms of our individual universities, tells us just how successful these schemes are in terms of attracting talent, retaining talent, and then on the back of that, achieving a lot of fantastic linkages for the UK in terms of future trade opportunities. Once students, after a couple of years, perhaps some of them return home and actually accelerate their careers. There's some really fantastic narratives that we know from our own alumni have led to huge success during that period when the UK did operate a post-study work scheme.
Great, thank you. And is there anything else the Russell Group is doing in particular in terms of trying to embrace an internationalisation agenda, both outbound and inbound?
I think we're looking at a variety of things. One of the things we've been doing over the last year or two is to make sure that we also maintain strong relationships with similar groupings across the world. So for instance, we had a summit between the Russell Group and the C9, and we had a summit in Shanghai just over about a year and a half ago, which was the first time there had been a summit between the sort of best Chinese universities and the top UK universities, and that was, I think, very important in terms of understanding where there might be possibilities for greater research, even greater research collaboration. We make sure that we keep in close touch with similar groupings, such as the G8 group in Australia. And so as a group, we maintain contacts with similar groupings, but we're also on the lookout to see where we can make the most in terms of of research collaborations, because after all, as the most research-intensive universities in the UK, we think a lot of the joint research projects that are done internationally naturally tend to flow across our universities. If you look at, for instance, even some of the European research projects on the Horizon 2020, I think the figure is about that 80% of them are with Russell Group universities, and I think that is a really important statistic.
And just to briefly go back to Brexit, is that something you're worried about, the sort of research potential of our universities, given EU funding? Possible restraints. We don't really know yet.
We don't know what's going to happen. We have taken a view as a Russell Group that the European research area, and particularly the excellence dimension of Horizon 2020 through schemes such as the ERC, have been hugely beneficial to the UK. There is no other funding system in the world across a geographical area such as that has created such opportunities for collaboration. Some of the most wonderful projects across Europe have been funded at scale because we have the capacity to do that across 28 countries. So we don't want to lose that. Fortunately, I don't think certainly the UK government doesn't want to lose that. It's made its position very clear that this is an area where they favour collaboration and continued collaboration. We know that many of the EU 27 countries also favour it. So I think we're optimistic. I mean, clearly anything that's done in this area will be conditioned by the wider Brexit negotiations, but we're optimistic. This is an area where it's very well recognised on both the EU and UK side that there's a win-win here in terms of maintaining the integrity of that European research area and continuing to collaborate.
Great. Last question. Are you pleased to see your rankings rising and rising as your international student enrolment has risen, and do you think the two are hand in hand?
The two things are correlated. I mean, if you look at most of the rankings, there is an element of the internationalization dimension is one of the elements that's recognized in most of the global rankings. To be honest, yes, of course, we're delighted to see that. We recognize just how difficult that is in a world in which many countries around the world are investing heavily in their higher education systems, and so new universities will rise very rapidly, universities in emerging economies will rise very rapidly as that investment continues. So we don't take anything for granted, but we're certainly very pleased to see that, and we certainly know that internationalization has played a part. And we know that many of the universities that have done well in the past, in terms of being the best in the world, have benefited from the fact that many of those who graduated from those universities have gone on to academic positions elsewhere. So it's that ability to create networks which comes from internationalization. It's not just the immediate impact, it's the longer term impact, which is on a much longer time scale. But that's important, and that's one which I'm sure will benefit us in decades to come.
Great. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.